Welcome to the Asking Why podcast. I'm your host, Clint Davis, and we have back for the third time Dr. Joe Malone. Super excited to talk to you, man. The last two times you've come on, just gotten so much great feedback from my friends and from my colleagues and from tons of clients that have listened to it. I have a couple different Bible study groups that I'm in that I've sent your stuff that we've talked about kind of sexual health and men's health and working with sex addicts a lot. I quoted you in my book last year that came out, and just really appreciated the work you've done and the work you're doing, and really excited to hear about your new book and all that stuff. So welcome back.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, Clint. And it's always great to talk with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, tell us kind of what's been going on, and tell me about this new book that's coming out and what you're working on.
Well, there's been a lot going on. This new book has been a lot of it. It was commissioned. I was commissioned by Heartbeat International. For those in your audience that might not be familiar, it's the world's largest pro-life organization to write this book. And it's called Women's Sexual Wellness. And really the main idea of it, Clint, is to try to get upstream, from young women getting into a situation where they're unmarried in most cases and not sure whether they're pregnant or not, and again, a lot of it, I think you'll agree with me, a lot of it is lack of knowledge as to how the human bodies work, male and female, and what's going on if it's a young woman, what's going on in the young man's head that she's dating or seeing or that type of thing, and vice versa for him, about her. So but again, women's sexual wellness, this is actually pretty much written for and from the female perspective, and is meant to try to specifically help those young women to avoid maybe next time being in the situation, if there's a suspected pregnancy and she turns out not to be pregnant, and that would be one case. And sometimes if she is pregnant and she decides to opt for life, then it comes in handy at that point too. So that's basically what's been going on. And I've been doing a lot of, podcasting, which I'm always grateful to be able to get out there and, like on yours, your great podcast, and to spread the word about this stuff. And then speaking in person, done a lot of that. Grateful for that as well. So just trying to get the word out here of the things that God has allowed me to learn, where that can help the most. My wife Jody and I have been married, just celebrated our 47th anniversary. So
Congratulations.
Thanks. It does us some good, as far as even us for this knowledge, but it helps a lot more, I think, the younger ones, and especially the unmarried younger ones. So
yeah. Well, so for you, I know sexual health from a Christian perspective is something you've really worked on. So how does this specifically, being a male, is your, for those who would go like, well, what do you know about sexual health for women? How does that play in? Did you have any females co-write with you, help you, your wife? How did that all play out?
Trust me, my wife has been a help on everything. Everything I've done. I wouldn't be here today without her. But to your question, just to refresh probably yourself and then also your audience who may have listened to our other conversations.
Yeah, please.
This odd place that I found myself in as a male, writing about women's health and sexual wellness, which is what my actual area is, came about through a series of providential, I believe, moves and situations. Again, to briefly refresh it, in 2012, so 12 years ago now, I was very concerned with women's health. I became very concerned with women's health, and particularly young women's health, because what I came onto was research showing that a girl or young woman, from the time that they're from about puberty up and through the time they start having their children, which on average is about 26, 27 these days, the state of their health has a huge effect on their children. The baby as it's developing in utero, and then for the whole life of the child and then adult.
Mm-hmm.
I went into it from that perspective. I actually created a college women's wellness program at the university I was teaching at the time. It's one of the larger universities here in Tennessee, near Nashville. And again, the perspective on it was, and the motivation was, trying to help this, they call it maternal imprinting, when the mother's body, which the baby literally creates itself from the mother's muscle, bone, and fat. So the higher quality of that, the higher quality of all the organs and that all the different things that get developed in utero. My initial interest was that, so just straight out, young women's wellness. What can we do? What can we do in this class that I created, women's personal conditioning at the university, to make their experience the best it could be for fitness and nutrition and all of that type of thing. And I ended up, somebody suggested I get a PhD around this because it was pretty unique. Well, in the process of getting the PhD, I interviewed 32 of them in depth, which means like an hour and a half each time. And then I had 10 focus groups. So I had these all women's classes with about 20 women in each class. And these focus groups, the 10 of them, we discussed their whole life, how it was going and getting insights on what they were going through. But the biggest thing that came out of all that was not their nutrition problems, not their fitness, getting to the fitness, getting to the gym problems. The biggest thing was this hookup culture thing that I had heard about, but really wasn't familiar with, and really didn't realize it was right there in front of me. And Clint, I was really, I guess, heartbroken and heart rent, I guess you'd say, by what they shared with me about what was happening in their personal lives as far as their relationship or lack thereof with the guys that were on campus. So
Yeah.
At that point, once I saw that the damage to them was much more than the other areas that I was looking at, and that was much more immediate, I went to my PhD dissertation committee and told them, I said, I think I've come across this thing that's more important than what I already was important. This whole affecting children's life wellness and multiple children. That's the reason I went into it, because I wanted to be able to do something about the numbers. Because as a fitness trainer before that, my career before that, it was frustrating to have to work one-on-one as a personal trainer, with all these folks. So they said, yeah, we have not heard of anybody doing that. So that's the direction it went. It went from just overall young women's wellness to young women's health and sexual wellness. So, and then I ended up writing a book. The first book you can see on the shelf behind me there, Battles of the Sexes, about the college situation, really kind of both genders, but especially the females.
Great book. It was that man is so helpful, for so many people, but just understanding the biology and the psychology of sex and what happens when people have early sex in their relationships, the science behind, orgasm and connection and all those things, which if you're listening to this and you want to go back, you can, listen to it on our other podcast before. But, man, so many people that I've worked with and clients and myself, it's been so helpful to be able to use the science, right, to kind of back up, God's call to wait to have sex for marriage, to value sexual intimacy, to value, waiting, and deferring our reward, so to speak. And that's been huge. So I just really appreciate all that work and that research and that effort. I know it came with some bumps and bruises and some pushback, and I'm sure tons of pushback today, even more so. So I really appreciate that.
Well, your appreciation is very much appreciated by me because as you said, it hasn't been appreciated by a lot of people, and there's a lot of people that want to disavow, the fact that we do have biological reality that's going on here, and everything, the way the male and the female, typically the way that males and females, the brains work are so different and all of that. So thank you, and it seems like it's been very helpful to the other people that have been able to access it, that type of thing. So this is, I guess you'd say, Clint, and your audience, just another step, I guess, more focused. And again, you can see the book we're talking about, Women's Sexual Wellness, the other one that's below Battle of the Sexes on the shelf there. It's so new that it isn't actually published yet. They tell me within about the next week it's going to be officially published.
Okay.
And so, yeah, people that want it now will have to just pre-order it. But I really tried to focus. I really tried to take the bigger picture, that we'd done in Battles of the Sexes, and really the college situation, especially, and broaden it out a bit as far as the different women it was aimed at, but especially the going younger, going down to where the 15 to 19-year-old age bracket, and then the college age bracket, and then above the college age bracket to about 30 or so. So that's who it's really focused on, and it really, I think, it brings that picture that you were describing so well, even better to people's minds. I've done a lot more research since then. I might mention that I taught at this university from 2005 to 2017. And in 2017, because I wasn't really going along with the program as far as the gender ideology and the different things, the social construction of sex and gender, that I got canceled. My classes actually got canceled. So I ended up with a book, Battle of the Sexes, and then a PhD, and then not a job. So I said to God, well, okay, God, what's going on here? Wasn't long before I had a call from, of all places, Princeton University, and they have a group up there called the Love and Fidelity Network. And what it is it purposely was created in 2007 by one of their young co-eds who was sick of only having hookup culture as the only option, on campus for relationships. So she created this Love and Fidelity Network, and quickly the other Ivy League campuses developed their own chapters of it, and it spread out to Notre Dame and Stanford and Hillsdale College. So I went up and spoke to them the first major time that I spoke at their conference. And then from there, it's just been kind of Christian group after Christian group on college, university campuses. And then also the pro-life folks. I came down about 4 or 5 years ago to the realization, kind of the epiphany, maybe the revelation might be the best way to say, that sexual integrity was the key to all of it for humans as far as the way we relate to each other in that area. And I thought, I can't be the first one to have ever thought of this. And there's got to be hundreds out there. You search the internet, there's going to be hundreds of people that have realized what I realized and are working on this. And so I searched it, and it ended up only being two that returns on it. One of them was a group that was working with young people, trying to keep them off porn. The other one was Heartbeat
Who was
International.
that?
I can't remember the name of the group. They're out of Massachusetts, I believe. It's something for youth. It's a really, again, a very nice, great program. I just wasn't looking particularly into the porn situation, but the other one that caught my attention was Heartbeat International, the pro-life group. And so I just emailed them, and they said right away, let's talk, let's talk on the phone. And so, sure, I love it. And so when we got on the phone, they said, who told you about us? Who sent you to us? And I said, I described the circumstances that it was just me thinking, and afterwards I thought, well, this is kind of maybe the Holy Spirit, this is God. But
Yeah.
we just were revamping our sexual integrity program. We had it about 15, 20 years ago. And it was very active, and then we stopped it about 7 years ago, and we were looking to get it going again, looking for somebody to lead it. Would you be interested in leading it? Would I ever? I said to him. So I've ended up working with them a lot. Again, this book, Women's Sexual Wellness, the one that's about to come out, is published by them, published by Heartbeat International. And again, if you're not familiar with it, listeners, they're the world's largest pregnancy help center organization. So they have like 2,800 different pregnancy help centers around the world that they work with, that they advise, and they're kind of the network for it. So they asked me, could you write eventually? And I've spoken at their conference many times now over the last several years. They asked me, could you write a book that was specifically for for our staffs to be able to counsel their young women. They're mostly dealing with young women along these lines of this sexual wellness knowledge and sexual integrity knowledge. And I said, I will give it a great shot. I think I can. And so again, Women's Sexual Wellness book that is about to come out is kind of the product of that. So the other thing I want to say is that for your audience, is that I've done a ton more research since the first book came out, and since it came out in 2018. And so I have a lot more that I've added into this the second book. But even since that book, has been finished, Women's Sexual Wellness, I've found a lot more things out, that I think that are important to add into the mix. So if you want, we could talk about some of those things.
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, first, yeah, I feel you so much. I mean, my book came out in November last year, and like since the book's come out, I've heard 1,000 different stories all over the country about sexual neglect, like giving people a name for, neglect and for the absence of these conversations about sexuality, and kind of the precursor, like we talked about last time, the precursor to a lot of the things that you're trying to deal with is what I'm dealing with is, hey, how do we just talk to kids about sexual health in general? How do we teach them sexual ethics? And the same thing you're saying has been, kind of what I've been searching for is like, who is out there teaching people healthy theology as Christians around the garden and sexuality, and how does this, male and female, relationship with each other in the garden, and what was it to represent? Is what does one flesh mean? And just diving into all those kind of things. And I found so much more out, just in the last 8 months that I'm like, oh, I'm like, what other book do I need to write, or do I need to write a Christian workbook, to this version? Because I wrote the book from a Christian perspective, but it wasn't heavily theological because of the fact that I wanted it to get in more hands than just, people to read it and go, oh, this Christian guy is going to have this crazy, idea. I wanted these kids to be safe and families to feel equipped no matter what culture they're from. But after, seeing how, and kind of the proof being in the pudding of, I knew what I was writing and what I was doing was true. But then once you put it out there, and you get the feedback of like, oh my gosh, this is, this is me, this is me, this is me. And you don't get anybody really saying, oh, this is wrong. Here's why it's wrong. I mean, I haven't had any pushback, which has been great. It's just, it kind of lights that fire inside of you again of like, okay, well, what more can I do? So
Right.
I totally get that and would love to kind of talk back and forth about that today. So can you tell me just overview of, I know the book's a little bit about sexuality, fertility, trying to get women to look at themselves holistically in a healthy way. Tell me more about what the book's about. And then, yeah, let's talk about kind of what you've learned since and with the research after.
Sure. And Clint, let me just say again, your audience I'm sure this will resonate with them, but thank you for your work in that area that you're doing your work in. That sexual knowledge piece, I think, is just so important. And I run into so many people that sex is such a subject that people want to avoid, especially like Christian folks. Not all Christian folks, but you know what I mean. It's there's a stigmatization to it, and you're doing a great job of, as you said earlier. I mean, it's sexual integrity that we're trying to teach. Really, sexual integrity education is the way I would look at it, because if it's left unaddressed, as it is in most cases these days, ultimately many of these young people's kids, their teachers by default is going to be porn, and we know how that's going to be. It's going to be a terrible situation. And naming the names and not being ashamed to, as you teach so well, being able to name things as sexually and just deal with it in a straightforward manner. I think it's just such a great thing you're doing. So yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I think that, God's given us both really important areas to work in, and yours is definitely, I think, starting the kind of the base of it, the base of it in the family. Quickly, let me just kind of got the manuscript here, again, I
Yeah,
don't have the
be
actual,
great.
yeah, I'll run through the different chapter headings. The way we were was how I started off, and what I try to do with that is just trying to give a picture of how it hasn't been a linear development as far as, from good in the past, and sexual integrity in the past, and to more and more sexual anarchy. It's really kind of cycled. So people that are despairing, of the way it is these days, it's on its cycle, and I'm convinced, and the research is showing me that we're on our cycle, we're on our way back to a time of more sexual integrity. I won't get into too much depth on that, but it's about 100 years. It's been about 100 years at a time as far as the pendulum swinging back and forth. The next chapter is human sex differences, as we were saying earlier, the biological reality. So I run through all of those things, and there's a ton of good stuff there. Spin cycles, the profound effects of women's menstrual cycles is the next chapter. There's so many women. I've had young women that I used to have in class that now are master's level health teachers themselves that have told me after they read The Battles of the Sexes, they said that chapter 2 on spin cycles or whatever I titled it in that book, so important because there's so many women that aren't aware of what's going on with themselves hormonally and why they feel and act the way that they do. So really a key
That's
thing
good,
there.
man.
Well,
I
thanks.
would say that's a huge, yeah, well, that's a huge thing that I hear all the time. And I talk about in the book is like, sexual neglect is our parents not talking to their kids about menstruation, right? Of course we heavily focus on pornography and masturbation and these things, but menstruation is another huge one. Luckily nowadays, they have period parties and they have these, these kind of where they have panties and they have tampons and they talk to these girls, and that's an amazing thing. I mean,
Yeah.
they need to have those conversations so that they can pay attention. But again, I was on the phone on the way over here with a person, and it's like, yeah, we don't even know what is healthy. I was gonna say normal, but I always say like don't say normal because normal is unhealthy in America. But so it's so huge for women to and girls and teenagers to be aware of how hormonal their periods and their menstrual cycles affect them, and that they're so different than they were 20 years ago. And I'm sure you go into some of that, but it's like, man, just the hormones and the things we've eaten and the medication we've taken and the way that we're exposed to things, women are not the same and men are not the same as they were 20 years ago when it comes to hormones and chemicals and, all that stuff.
Absolutely. You're absolutely correct on all of that. So it's challenging, but as you said, the thing that makes it the most challenging is not discussing it and not
Mm-hmm.
doing it from a perspective of we want to promote self mastery in these young people. We want to promote self control. We're not in it like a lot of sex educators are to actually sexualize them. We're actually in it to teach them skills where they can control it and use it for the goodness that has huge potential for goodness that it has. We all know.
That's such a great
Um,
point. I mean, it is such a swing and a polarity in our country where it's like, man, yeah, sexual freedom is a lack of discipline, a lack of control, the ability to do whatever you want to and not feel bad about it. When we know like discipline equals freedom,
yep.
self control equals freedom, running wild and doing whatever you want to, yes, for a moment feels like freedom. But then you just add on all this trauma and all this exposure and all these experiences that then at some point, people are sitting in our offices doing therapy around, golly, I thought this was good for me. I thought this was empowering. I thought this was good, but yet I just added it to the list of things that now I need to work through.
Yes. And for young men especially, and men, I guess men even as we age, um, hooking up and porn both end up being an addiction. Basically you
Oh yeah.
become an addict, and then you're the expert on that, so I won't go any further into that. But um, it turns something that really, really is beneficial, like again, like a good marriage, a great marriage. Literally one of the things real quick that I've learned since we last talked that we'll get into more when we get done with me running through the book is that life expectancy is increased for a woman. A good marriage, on average, increases a woman's life expectancy by 2 years, and
Well.
a man it increases it at 10 years. So, that's comparable to stopping a lifetime smoking habit or
Mhm.
dropping a cocaine habit as far as the life expectancy that you're getting by getting married. So, it's something that really, really is a huge benefit in young people's and all of our lives. But teaching it from that perspective and teaching how sex fits into that is really, right, I think, key to the young people having the great future that we want them to have. Back to the book. She's quite the pill. I talked about hormonal birth control and kind of all the ups and downs and arounds of that. Humiliation
Mhm.
of hookup culture, that's pretty self explanatory. That's what I saw on the college campus. Um, the Tinder trap, specifically, Tinder as in the dating app, all kinds of problems with that. And again, down your alley more, the pain of pornography. So got quite a bit of basically the biochemistry behind all of that. Stigma of STIs, which have kind of skyrocketed, especially in the last since about 2015. and especially on the female side of things, because of the anatomy, they're much more vulnerable to them. Marriage, MIA. As I was saying earlier, marriage, there's a good marriage. There's so many benefits to it. I've got pages of benefits to it here. And I've been thinking the same thing as you, Clint. I'm probably good for one more book, maybe. As you know from your experience, there's a heck of a lot of work to them. But I think a third one would be, I want to do it over marriage, because I just think it's just so critical to most people's happiness, during their lifetime. How
Well, if
many?
you want to co-writer, I'd love to help you with it. Maybe I can get my other one out, and then I'd love to help
Yeah,
you. I love
well,
talking
let's
about marriage.
seriously think about that, because I would love that. You have a whole area of expertise that I don't have, and I have some that you don't have. So
No,
I
100%.
think it'd be great. Let's talk about that later. How men fall in love differently than women. Okay, that's the big one. You mentioned it earlier. That really gets the attention on the college campuses. Men categorize women according to their sexual permissiveness. Again, something that women don't want to hear a lot of times, but that's true. Women's sexual wellness lifestyle. So there's specific things as far as the lifestyle that you described earlier. Waiting for sex, and getting married maybe a little bit younger, because younger meaning like 22 to 28, 29, somewhere in that range. You keep yourself from all these different things that promiscuity do to you as a young woman, as far as making you more apt to get all the reproductive cancers. That lifestyle of hooking up, and the different things that young women these days do so commonly, down the road really helps them get on a pathway to having more of the uterine, ovarian, cervical, breast, you name it, reproductive related cancers are affected negatively by
Mm.
that kind of behavior. As a matter of
Can you
fact,
talk about that for just a second?
yeah.
What are I would assume, just off the cuff, not reading the book, yet, that toxic stress, shame, disease, all of those things, lead the body to breaking down and then being more susceptible to cancer. But what did you find?
All those things are true. All the mental illness components that you just described, and their effects are true. But above and beyond that, let me just run through them here. Early promiscuity leads to higher chances of vaginal and cervical cancer, because you're bringing, again, with promiscuity with different sexual partners, you're bringing so many different kinds of pathogens there into that
Mm.
sensitive area of a woman's body. None or minimal number of pregnancies and none or minimal breastfeeding raises her lifetime chances of developing ovarian and uterine cancer. So we're kind of working from the outside in on a woman's reproductive anatomy. And so working further in as far as the ovarian and uterine cancer, the old school and kind of classic, the kind of Christian biblical approach to relationships, of where, over the past 400 years of American history, we've had about an average median, I should say, age of women getting married at about 20 to 21 up until the 1980s. So then it started changing radically, going higher, older. So they were getting married younger, and they're just with this one man. They weren't with anybody before, because of the way promiscuity and premarital sex was looked at. So let me go back to the picture here. None or minimal numbers of pregnancies and none or minimal breastfeeding raises her lifetime chances of developing ovarian and uterine cancer. So the old school approach, and then younger marriage, having babies probably fairly soon, and having quite a few of them, and breastfeeding them, all of that drops her chances of ovarian and uterine cancer. Now, delayed childbearing and fewer pregnancies. So think about our age of marriage. It's gone up from,
Mm-hmm.
about 20 and a half in the 1960s, up to about 29 right now for a woman. So 9 more years, let's just say, there. And one other thing to throw in here is that puberty is starting earlier, as you said earlier, because of the different chemical changes in our environment. It's 4 years
Yep.
earlier, Clint and listeners, than it was 100 years ago. Women's puberty is happening an average of 4 years earlier. So the average, so to get the kind of go back to the old picture versus the new picture, 100 years ago, a young woman was hitting puberty about 14 and a half, and they were getting married at about 21 and a half. So they call it PM, puberty marriage gap of about 7 years. Now they're hitting at about 10 and a half years old, and they're not getting married until 29. So there's about a 17-ish year delay there. So it makes it, for one thing, much more difficult to be chaste until they're married and avoid, being sexually active. But the other thing is, again, they were only waiting about 7 years, 100 years ago, and they didn't have any other sexual partners. So, but they got married younger and they started having babies younger. And that really, really is beneficial as far as the way the woman's body seems to be designed to work. So again, we've worked through cervical, vaginal, uterine, ovarian, and all the behavior of the old school works better for it. Delayed childbearing, I was getting to that, and fewer pregnancies. So that's what we're getting with a lot of our young women these days. If they're getting married at all, and if they're having children, a lot of them are discovering problems because they're in their 30s. Once they're getting married at 30ish, and they're trying to start having babies. 35 maybe. Women's fertility drops off a cliff basically after age 32. They lose about half of their fertility from 32 to 35. And then they lose about the other half to about from 35 to 40. So the way we've got things going right now is really, really bad as far as a woman's wellness,
Yeah,
lifetime.
it's interesting in a world of feminism, right? Which, I'm a feminist. I love women. I think they're amazing. But in the far swing of feminism in the toxic way, just like there's toxic masculinity, there's toxic, I think, femininity. Uh, talking about these things can really upset people, and especially two men talking about it, because, we're not women, and so we don't have a right to talk about it or whatever. I can just hear somebody saying it. But what we're talking about is, women's health, and that we love them and care about them and see them as an image bearer of God, and our sisters and our wives and our mothers. And we want them to live and thrive and, have the most successful chance at a life and being a parent and a mother and a grandparent and an employee and all of those things. Mm-hmm. And yet we're directly tying in, sexual promiscuity and multiple partners to cancer and earlier death and stress and anxiety and, the mental and physical, and I would say spiritual death that mm-hmm. those things cause.
Exactly. Yeah, that's absolutely a great summary of it. Specifically, going on further, and I'll finish this real quick. But I think this is important because most people don't realize this. I mean, the young women themselves and then the young men that they're having their relationships with don't realize any of it. A scary stat for your audience is a woman who has her first child around the age of 20. Now, that's the good part of it. Has half the chance of developing breast cancer as a woman who has her first child around the age of 30. So I'll say that again. Yeah, for a woman who has her first child around 20, she has half the lifetime chances of getting breast cancer, which has become a scourge. It's the number one cancer diagnosis in the world, even though 99% of people who get them are the females. You said we care about. Yeah, we care about them. And then we're displaying that, for anybody that can't understand this, by what we're talking about here, because breast cancer has become a scourge. It's become the number one cancer diagnosis in the world, above smoking. And again, it's only one sex that basically gets it.
It's so crazy that, so many people would have friends and family, myself included, who have died from cancer, who have had, double mastectomies or mastectomies, or, who have not made it through those things, who go on walks, who have stickers, who have the breast cancer, awareness shirt, who will push back and fund all kinds of things to help with medication and management and preventative, wellness for these things. And that's what you're talking about. You're talking about, this book being a gift to women and families to teach their children, to model for their daughters and their wives, as men, as husbands, as families, how to limit these things. And you're talking about half. I mean, 50% less of a chance.
Yes.
If you told me I had to drive across town and I had a 50 shot of making it, like, I'm not going to drive across town. So it's interesting, that from a Christian perspective, it's amazing to me, and just speaks to God's grace and mercy that, sexual health and limiting partners and, following God's design for men and women and representing Christ in the church and all that beautiful theology, it is beneficial for us. in our lives, it's the healthy way to go.
Yes, it is. I mean, you can look at it like the Bible is God's manufacturer specifications that would come along with your body, or the owner's manual. Either way. So exactly. And one other thing. This is in the first book, and also happens to be in chapter 2 as well when we're talking about the cycles. But women are not supposed to have as many menstrual cycles as they have over a lifetime. Just real quick, this is raises breast cancer risk much higher than as much as what we're talking about otherwise here. The other behavioral things we're talking about. In the old days, in most of our development, most of the time that humans have been here without birth control, without hormonal birth control, kind of what I would call the natural family developing. And of course, there is, by a woman when she's breastfeeding on demand, it's generally, pretty reliable about their cycle won't start back up. So there was natural things that were happening. So they didn't end up with, most of them didn't end up with 20 kids. But in general, the number of periods that they had, the number of menstrual cycles that they had over their lifetime was about 160, because they were pregnant that much of the time. So it was 9 months here, 9 months there. Even if the baby didn't survive, and so they ended up with 7 kids, maybe out of 50, about maybe 10 or 12 pregnancies that they had. But they're pregnant a lot, and that's a natural state of thing. And again, so you're looking at 160 cycles. Our women today have a 450 on average. So we have 450 versus 160. And what happens there, Clint, and your audience, is that every time a woman goes through a cycle, menstrual cycle, and that tissue sloughs off, and they have their period, and their breasts go through a change as far as the cellular structure in their breasts when they run through a cycle. Every time there's that change, there's a chance for mutations. And so when you put you take a system that was working on 160 chances for mutations, and you add in up to 450, you just get a much higher chance that somewhere along the line they're going to get mutations in part of that reproductive physiology. So that's another huge factor in why we have so much more breast cancer than we used to, along with the chemicals and everything else. The other thing you mentioned, promiscuity. Promiscuity. Let me give you the stat on that real quick. 10 or more lifetime sexual partners raise a woman's lifetime, all cancers, not just reproductive, but all cancer risk by 91%. So it's
Wow.
about, if you have 10, it's about a 10% risk, raising in risk each time you have one. Just for curiosity's sake, for men, it's about 64% greater rate as far as having 10 or more lifetime sexual partners. So
And that
anyway,
would go back into what you were talking about as far as anatomy and the difference in men and women and their risk factors, just anatomically for STDs, STIs, all that stuff.
exactly. So, and at the end of the book, the last chapter is called Romance Revolt. And what we're trying to do there is just encourage these young people, encourage anybody that's not married to take the biblical approach as you described it. Again, no matter where you've been, whatever's happened, in your past, nobody's perfect. I'm not perfect for sure. I'm not. My expertise should not be looked at as coming from getting it all right myself. But having learned what I've learned and applying it to my life from that point forward it was so much easier to get things right and to not be led down those pathways that especially young men end up going down. So that's what the book kind of is entailed of, or the things that are in it, the major things. There's a section on pregnancy too, I called Positively Pregnant, because most people don't realize how many benefits to women being pregnant is, to them, of course, as well as the baby. So that kind of takes care of the book. As far as things that I've learned since.
Now, do they have to be barefoot in the kitchen while they're pregnant? Is that also? I hear the
Well,
cancel culture calling. You
if
know,
yeah, if that works for you, I guess.
that's right. Yeah, I just want to say that I laughingly say it because I think, we're in the South, you're in the South, my listeners are mainly Christian, for the most part, as far as I know. But what we're not saying is that everyone should have 10 babies and women's only, job is to get pregnant and stay at home and do all these things. What we're pointing to is that the slide in not valuing those things and the effects on their body, their hormones, their risk for cancer, their risk for disease has drastically increased, in 100 years. And so women were going from, you know, valuing and as a part of society is looking at being a mother, birthing children, nursing children, having even, I would say, natural births, to a very, individualized, westernized way of living where everything is medicated, everything is looked at as a clinical trial. And then we shifted into, women working and being out of the home and having babies less and then to some degree and the whole swath of society not valuing that and saying, hey, you don't have to value that, that's not something you need to value. We're not putting a moral judgment on that. We're just looking at the research and the statistics of why are women dying and getting cancer and getting sick and more anxious and more depressed. And part of it, what you're playing out is that the natural way that women have babies and raise families and do that in a healthy way does a lot of prevention for that. And the culture shift of people being married later and looking at, career and money and all those things as more valuable than having babies and having families is costing us all in the big scheme of things.
Yes.
Is that a good summary?
That is an excellent summary. You need to be my editor, I'll tell you that, Clint. Or I need to be yours, or we need to be both, because that is perfect. Yes. I mean, coming to mind as you were saying that, there's there's things about, I don't want to paint the picture at like the past was perfect, because for one thing, childbirth was very dangerous in
Yeah, I mean,
those
they
days.
lost half the babies, right? Like 50% of because people will push back. We were at a friend's house last night, and he's a ER doctor. And a shout out to my buddy Jason, who doesn't listen to my podcast, but he will now. Um, and so he was saying, yeah, people, my wife had a natural birth, and a couple of ladies last night did, and then a couple didn't. And so we were just kind of talking about it. And he was saying, yeah, people will say, well, women have been doing this for thousands of years, in the lake and at their home. And he's like, yeah, and 50% of them died, So I'm with you. Like, I don't want to sound like we're painting this picture that, the medieval times were better for women, or that the women weren't oppressed or weren't abused or weren't neglected or, didn't have the right to vote. That's a totally different conversation than what we're having about the biology and the function of babies and breastfeeding and reproductive health.
Right, exactly. Just the recognition that, we're in a position, Clint, and everybody's listening, that we can have the best of both worlds, because, we can avoid the deaths in childbirth that were so common, even up, 100 years ago, even from the 1940s forward, because cesarean section really wasn't feasible until the 1940s forward, because they kept losing them when they did do that to infection and that type of thing. They didn't really understand how the infection elements work. So it's really from about the 1950s forward that cesarean section became really effective. And up to that point, even in more modern times, I know that about half the children in childhood died, up to about 1900 as well, just from different things, just from different diseases and different situations, from being a little kid and not having a fully developed immune system. But for the women, in that time period, from what I understand, from about 1900 forward, is about 1 in 6 still that died in childbirth, the women themselves. So, it's dangerous. It was dangerous back then in that way. But as you said, what we're pointing out is you could observe that, okay, all the good that modern medicine has brought as far as protecting against that. But at the same time, you could observe, the logic of, the human body, especially the human female body, seems to be built for this. It seems to be function maybe best, in that kind of a capacity, if that's what somebody, a young woman, wants to do. And as you said earlier, it shouldn't be looked down upon if this, and I think it's an instinct in a lot of girls and young women that I've worked with, they want to have a family, and family is a huge element to them in their life as far as their happiness goes. And I'll get more to that in a minute. But there's a balance there, I think, that we're talking about. A balance as far as taking the best from the past and taking the best from the present, and kind of marrying the two of them. And you really can come out with some really great outcomes, when you do that. So,
I love
yeah.
that. Yeah, I love that. I mean, try to be a very moderate person, and so yeah, what I hear you saying is like, and I think it's Japan, that, I think it's like 17%. This was a couple years ago, the research, but yeah, only 17% or 17% of like Japanese, males and females are not even like getting married. They're not having babies. They can watch porn and they can hook up and they can play video games and they're fine. And the consequences to the culture over time, that's what we're trying to avoid. We're saying, okay, how can we not undervalue and not overvalue these things? Because we're trading infant death and loss for, 65 and 70-year-old women dying of breast cancer. So we're just sending it later. We're going, okay, well, yeah, you get to have a career in your 20s and 30s and 40s and, make money and have purpose and feel good about yourself and do these amazing things. But the consequence is that a large portion of those women then go on to have more cancer and more sickness and more illness and die early.
Right. Yeah, and breast cancer used to be rare, very rare before the 1970s. I mean, like in the 1 in 3,000. Now it's 1 in 8 women will get it in their lifetime.
Wow. So it went from 1 in 3,000 in the 80s. Is that what you said?
In the 70s, in the early
70s
70s.
to
Yeah,
1 in 8.
1 in 8 now. Yeah, and then again, there's lots of
Man,
factors. The chemical
of
factors
course.
definitely have to be a part of it, but this lifestyle factor is a huge part of it. Just the number of cycles versus in the old days versus now, and
I mean,
the
even just formula to breastfeeding. I mean, you gave the
yeah.
stat of like how helpful breastfeeding is for lots of things. I mean, you can go down that line, and again, we're not saying that if you can't breastfeed or you choose not to, you're a terrible person or you're the cause of all these problems at all. We're
No.
just looking at the fact that there are benefits to it, and that wanting to give people all the information that they can so they can make the best decision and have make the best choices with their life that they can do.
And not find themselves in that situation and wonder why they're there. I mean, there's
Mm-hmm.
um,
Because we've
again,
made a ton of dumb mistakes as parents. I mean, now we didn't know a lot of things, about parenting when we were. I just, oh, that's what my parents said. That's what I saw in movies. This is what you do, and you do it, and then you get a couple of years in, and you're like, man, I would have loved for someone to tell me that there were other options, or that didn't work, or that was based on a myth or a bad habit, or same thing with marriage and being a man. And there's so many things that I work with people as a counselor through, and I know you have too. That like, man, they would just beg me to tell them, on the other end. That's why I love marriage and premarital. It's helping people go, hey, I've been married 15 years now, which is long to some and short to others. But man, I'm just figuring out some stuff at 41 as a professional in my marriage and in my sex life and in parenting that I hope that generations, our job as Christians is to help them break those cycles and not start out in deficits and be able to have the choice, the information, man. Just give people the information, the facts, and then they can go on to make whatever choices they want without judgment and with grace. But it seems like in this culture, it's hard to talk about the facts without it sounding like we're telling you what to do or shaming you for not choosing it or, making some kind of moral judgment. It's like, no, that's the opposite of why we're having these conversations. We're having these conversations to give people all the scientific and biblical information as Christians and as people who want to make good choices. And then, none of us are going to do it perfectly, and we're going to try, and we're going to mess it up.
yeah, and that's the whole idea behind wellness is just giving it some thought, giving your behaviors some thought as far as what you're practicing, and if you can be informed, as you were just saying, be enlightened really to the different things, the different situations, and how the mind and the body work, you can make your own choices, like you said. Of do you want to take this step or that step? Do you want to behave this way or that way? And that's totally exactly right, because that's what I've always done with my students, my college students, is I just try to lay out there in front of them. Okay, here's the situation, and it's up to you. How you run your life. So absolutely, we are total agreement on that. Um, as far as what I've learned from the last book and that type of thing, it's not only a little segue here. It's not only our physical health, our well, so not only our physical health, but also our mental health. That's largely dependent upon some of these behaviors, and then just things as far as our happiness in our life. So, let me give you a few of these things. I know we're getting probably coming up on time, but
Oh, we're good,
something that
man. I'm loving it.
okay. Um, well, something that I came across, and again, remember I had this college class for 5 years of all young women in each one of the classes. And I just noticed as they started sharing with me as we got to know each other better, just noticed how unhappy a lot of them were. And again, the hookup culture ended up being a lot of the culprit. But what I found out from the recent research, and this is something that people who have young daughters or they maybe have nieces that are in this age, they can maybe get some benefit out of this as well. What the research is showing is that girls and young women used to not be as depressed as the boys their same age up until about the mid 1970s. Again, we're talking about, we're always coming back kind of that sexual revolution thing.
Yep.
From about 1976 forward, high school senior girls, their happiness levels as they measure them over the years, they have these surveys they do every year, they started dropping. And into the 1990s, they dropped lower than the boys are on average, that same age. And then they continue to drop to now. And of course, a lot of your audience and yourself probably remember the research they did on 2021, girls. They were showing that 57% of the girls in the high school age group were persistently sad and depressed and that type of thing. And
Mm-hmm.
the boys were only at about 39%, about half as depressed. Well, this discovery and this research is that in puberty, and let's just say ballpark, from about 10 to about 15 years old, again, it varies for the two sexes and that type of thing. But during that time period, they get this huge increase, along with other hormones, of oxytocin. And oxytocin, everybody probably will be familiar as far as a bonding hormone. Bonding, but also sex drive. It raises sex drive as well. So they get 5 times, both sexes get about 5 times as much oxytocin as they had before. And in that big burst of oxytocin, it has effects on the males in one way and the females in another. On the males, because they're also getting this huge increase of testosterone, the testosterone and oxytocin are pretty much antagonistic to each other. So the effect on them, though, is on the boys is that their sex drive goes up, along with the rise in the testosterone causing that. With the girls, but that their bonding desire does not go up. The boys typically.
Mm-hmm.
The girls, on the other hand, their sex drive goes up as well because of this oxytocin push. But their bonding drive really launches their bonding drive. And then again, the old days where again premarital sex was really frowned on. We all know it went on, but before the sexual revolution, there was a lot less of it than there is now, and there's a lot more of women going through their teenage years and getting married. Like I said, they're usually younger, like 21 or so, and being virgin brides. They didn't seem to have that same. They didn't have that depressive tendency, but because with the girls, it not only raised their sex drive, but also they got this really strong bonding drive. And if you put it back into that time period of let's say pre 1965, where they started, dating maybe at age 16 and started going steady with somebody. Again, everybody though kind of understood for the most part that sex was not going to be on the table for that. It was going to only happen after marriage. The breakups that they had didn't seem to be as devastating as in the culture that we have now, where sex is on the table, and a lot of times it's the first thing on the table.
Or at least, and you can answer this for me maybe, but even if they're not having sexual intercourse or vaginal sex, oral sex ending with orgasm and, ending with sexual desire and those things, that's very, very commonplace, even for Christian kids who are saying, well, I'm not having sex, but we're doing everything else, but I'm saving,
Right.
sexual intercourse for marriage, which again is still more beneficial than, going full bore. But the reality is that it the release of the orgasm and that bonding and the oxytocin, that is a major connective, intimate thing that is happening to their bodies and to their brains that is the problem or part of the problem.
Yes, and on the girl side, because of the what I was just saying about the 5 times more oxytocin, and also the messenger RNA goes up by 10 times, 10 to 15 times. So it makes it much more prevalent as far as them feeling it. For the girls, it's got this bonding desire element to it. And again, as you just said, where there's sex involved, whatever kind it is, that brings especially him to orgasm, but her to sexual arousal and being sexually excited, any of that sexual activity with her is going to make her oxytocin have a real strong tendency to want to bond with him, and with him not at all really, basically, because it's getting to the orgasm with his high testosterone levels, and again young high testosterone levels. So we have a mismatch there with the desires and motivations of one sex versus the other. And what they found, Clint and audience, is that these girls that end up being depressed at so much higher rates now than they used to. Again, mid 70s back versus now. Is what they found out is that the ones that end up being depressed and anxious and having all these, like, suicidal ideation and all the different things, the cutting, all the things that go along with it, 68% of them have had some kind of a breakup previous to it, to the episode of going into that. With boys and young men that do end up depressed, because some of them do, it's only 39% have had a breakup. Now, again, I think what we're seeing here is that previous to the sex of all kinds, as you described so well, whether it's vaginal or intercourse or not, prior to that, these breakups didn't have the same effect on these girls as they're having now. So again, we're in a situation where our society, with our practices of casual sex going on of all different types between these young people, and in many cases just trying for sure to get the male to the orgasm stage, is having one effect on the girls and having the other effect on the males. As I said earlier, it's really though leading the males down a pathway. Whether you can argue that it was not harmful to them like it is the girls, it's leading them down a pathway to an addiction type of a situation with that type of thing, or also porn and all that type of thing. Because with males, it's also beneficial to go through the bonding process, and as I described earlier, as far as the life expectancy differences. So these young women, these girls and young women, age 10 to 15 now, are getting set up to be unhappy, a large percentage of them, and they're going into their 20s and even into their 30s, not finding a mate, and as happened earlier, in history, and not getting into that beneficial situation of avoiding promiscuity and building a life together that used to happen from a much younger age. So even though everything is true as far as what you said about we're not trying to tell people what to do as far as their personal choices, we're laying out though the benefits and the reason that the old school approach to it and the biblical approach to it has so many benefits to it compared to what we're seeing now. It's not only the health element, though, not only mental health and physical health, but also just flat out happiness. Because I always ask this to the college students when I'm speaking to them on campuses. Do you know what the number one predictor of life happiness is? None of them know it. And so I have to lay it out for them. Marriage quality. Marriage quality. Now, again, still, most people get married, and the quality of their marriage pretty much determines their life happiness. Now, the research on it shows that about for a typical married couple that are just they're just happy with each other, but they're not very very happy with each other. They have their problems, and it's just your typical human situation. The happiness increase, the chances of being happy go up by about 151%. For those rarer couples, which I would count my wife and I in, that are very happy together, and I'm sure that probably you are as well with your wife, Clint, where we're very happy, it goes up by a whopping 545% chance that you're going to
Wow.
be very happy with your life. So being married and getting into a happy, fulfilling marriage, having children, and them having children is such a huge part of our well-being. When you look at happiness, because most of the kids that I've had in class before, that'll be one of the things that they always say when I say, "What do you want to do with your life? How do you want your life to come out?" Well, I want to be happy, especially the women. The girls, a lot of them say it. This is a factor that really is under recognized. Now, the number one predictor of marriage quality, if it is the number one predictor of life happiness, number one predictor of marriage quality is number of premarital sexual partners. And again, you want that to
Hmm.
be on the low end rather than the high end, as far as hopefully just one, and that is your spouse, or not many above one. The other element to that is, as far as getting what age to get married. Now, it is true. There's been quite a bit of research that young people, and we'll just talk about women, because again, women are basically the gatekeepers, the deciders, as far as, in most cases, when it comes to sexuality, whether sex is going to happen or not. But the research has shown that from the ones that have gotten what we classify as early marriage now, 25 and younger, and again, remember the typical for the 400 years we've been here, as American colonies first and in the United States, it's been about 20 to 21 has been the average age of the median age, which means, half of them got married before that, and then half of them got married after that. So 20 to 21 has been the median age. And now it's at 29. Uh, so it's a situation where the all those benefits that we talked about earlier with the early children having and that type of thing are come into play there. But the recent research since the 1980s has shown that since that age of marriage has started going up, and it's radically gone up from 20, I guess, in 1960 to 29 now, um, that
And
that
that's is that 29 the median? Is that what you're saying?
yes,
That half get married after 29 and half get married before?
yes,
Okay.
that's
Wow.
pretty extreme. But the research has shown that the ones that are getting married median age 25 and younger are don't do as well as far as their marriage lasting, for one thing, them getting divorced, as the ones who wait until after 30. But here's a very important nuance to that again, the folks out there, this may be the most important thing that we talk about today. The research that's gone along with that. So your picture is that the ones that are getting married these days, 25 and 25 years old and less, are having worse times with their divorce rate than the ones that are waiting until after their age 30, which is what we've been talking against basically as far as the physical effects of it.
Yeah.
Um, but the exception to that is the ones that don't cohabit, um, you know,
Hmm.
generally avoid premarital sex, and we're talking about women, have the very best marital records. So from age 22 to 30, and probably more on the 22 end, of getting married, not having had sex with anybody but your husband, ending up to be, not cohabiting with anybody, that is the very best case scenario for getting married for a woman. So I guess again, the rules like we were talking about earlier, God's prescriptions, biblical prescriptions, old school ethical prescriptions, conservative prescriptions, um, of limiting and really cherishing marriage, sex for marriage, and then not trying to maybe make do all these things, other things that you said, getting a couple degrees, getting a couple of professional jobs going before you capstone your having your capstone marriage at age 30 or so. The ones that are getting married earlier, like I said, 22, 23, or 24, and then getting their family started and that type of thing, seem to have the best success. And physiologically, I'll just add this to this. that age of 18 to 22, which I've worked with again a lot with the college students, the brain, as you know, Clint, is still very plastic at that point. Again, there's this major inhibitory system in the brain called the GABA system. It's the
Mhm.
biggest, inhibitory system in the brain. In other words, it's the braking system as far as your judgment and being able to do things that go against your impulses. It doesn't really, the receptors for it don't set up until 18 to 22-ish. And your brain doesn't really solidify as far as that plasticity to it until about age 25, maybe even greater especially for the guys, 26, 27.
Yeah, I know. It's saying like 27, 28 these days. The prefrontal's not even fully developed. It's crazy.
Right. The advantage of that, though, is in a marriage situation, if you're getting married, you have two brains that are still really plastic if they're younger, if they're 25 or younger. And you don't have the very plastic brain, brains that are trying to meld together in a marriage if you're 28, 29, 30, 31, 32. So
You're what we call
that's,
set in your ways, right?
yeah, and there's really something to that. I mean, again, I think that's the reason that 22-year-old, 23-year-old marriage, the traditional marriage where she's not sexually experienced, he's hopefully not sexually experienced either. It has the best record as far as divorce chance and also happiness. So that's just something that your audience needs to know. If they know young people, you'll hear this commonly. You'll hear that, oh, the people that are getting married before 25, they're doing worse on the divorce situation and the happiness situation than the ones that are waiting until 30-ish or so. Well, it depends on whether they're cohabiting, which is the 75% of them are cohabiting these days, and the cohabiting that usually isn't just with the person you're going to marry, it's with several different, maybe guys, if you're speaking from the women's perspective. And that seems to add to the tendency for the marriage, if it happens 30 or thereafter, not to last and not to do well. And I think that just in a lot of ways makes sense because if you're breaking up these cohabitations off and on for 5 years, 6, 7 years, you're getting used to leaving, and they're getting used to leaving as well. So that's something that they're doing it so commonly these days, cohabiting, and even thinking that they're helping themselves. I think as far as their marriage going forward, and maybe if they're cohabiting with the person they're going to marry, there might be some truth to that. But when you get
I mean,
outside of
I
that,
think the research still is very clear that living together increases divorce rate by 40+%.
right, and I think it doubles it if it's somebody, if you're living with anybody that doesn't end up being your husband and you marry somebody else later on, I think it doubles the chance of
Wow.
divorce.
Yeah, I just want to take a moment to talk. We've talked about the science a lot, but there's a really great book called Our Bodies Tell God's Story. Have you read that by Christopher West? And it's kind of a
And
summary. Go ahead.
yeah, I have it actually. Now that you mention it, yes,
Yeah,
it
I
is a
mean,
great
it's
book.
such a great theological picture. And John Mark Comer has a book called Loveology that's really good. I mean, just there's been some really rich theology. I think Matt Chandler has something out from different, Reformed and Catholic, but just it's rare. But there's information out there now when it comes to sexuality. And this is what I mean by going back to like the Building Better Bridges philosophy and kind of what I'm writing and teaching is that I have two boys and, they're, almost 7 and almost 10. So we're starting to have these slow conversations. Well, first we've had conversations about their body and their private parts and erections and, how all that's working. Well, we're slowly moving into the dating world. And, my 10-year-old's starting to notice things and he'll say something like, "Oh, mommy sat by that guy and didn't have her ring on. He's going to want to marry her," and so we're like, okay, well, let's talk about why you think that. And we talk through it. And, he has no clue what he's talking about, but he's starting to pay attention to there are men and women and they marry each other. And I don't really know how that works. He doesn't have the biology to really want any of that stuff yet, but he's starting. He had a church camp this summer and he noticed the teenagers flirting. And one of them said, "Well, my girlfriend's in the other room," and he's picking up on these things. And I say this because I'm really excited and terrified at the same time to see what happens with my boys because they haven't been exposed to adult content. They haven't been sexually abused. They haven't been neglected. They haven't watched a bunch, like I grew up, and most people today, I think, grow up not realizing when you let a 10-year-old or a 9-year-old grow up watching teenagers shows, watching people flirt, watching people date, watching people get married, and that's a heavy focus on the shows and the movies and the books that they read, then they, before they're ready, start to interpret and play and pretend to do those things. And I'm not, and again, we're valuing marriage, and we're saying marriage is amazing, it's good. We should teach our kids that it's important, and there's a biblical philosophy to it, and ethics, and all those kind of things. But I think we have a huge problem with exposing little children to highly flirtatious and hypersexual content that isn't porn, but that is still intrinsically teaching them that love and the excitement of the chase and the Disney or the movie, the Hollywood kind of love story is so valuable, and more valuable than, sacrifice and serving. And so, barring anything crazy happening, I'm interested, just as a clinician, as a dad, to watch my kids and go, okay, I don't really know a whole bunch of people, myself included, who got that experience. We don't have a sample size of kids who haven't seen porn, or who haven't been sexually abused, or who haven't been, indoctrinated with this idea of, hypersexuality and dating and in teenage years. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
So it's like what I'm trying to create in our culture within the church is, can we protect these kids enough and put boundaries in place enough so that we have a population in 20 years that goes, okay, we didn't see porn, we didn't get abused, we didn't get exposed, we didn't have sex with a bunch of people. Here's how that plays out in our world and in our marriages and our families. We already kind of see that through all the research that you're showing, but that's still in the midst of a bunch of really healthy, unhealthy, traumatized, exposed people. And so it's like, well, that speaks to how good God is, that he can, in spite of our mistakes and in spite of our, multiple partners, we still have hope, and that we can still have good marriages and good generational, pass down good generational things to our kids. But man, I'm just on the other side of going, and I know I'm an idealist, but I'm like, I want to see a large population of people who can get through childhood somewhat unscathed, so that we can see the benefit of this stuff for generations to come. And that's where I'm with you. Like, without having rose-colored glasses, sure, porn didn't exist, but women had it rough and men had it rough for all of human history up until now. And so let's come together to find the best things from back then, and then use the benefit of education and science and research to, man, keep our kids safe and keep them educated. And then the second thing I would say is, teaching that proper theology of going, hey, listen, marriage and sex is about God. He created it. He thinks it's awesome. In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve were naked and not ashamed. Why? Well, they were naked and not ashamed because they didn't objectify each other. They loved each other. God said, go and be fruitful and multiply. Well, have sex, enjoy it, be fruitful, multiply, have babies, have kids, go and populate the earth and bring heaven and Eden to the rest of the earth. And sin happens, and what's the first thing they do? They cover up. Yeah. And why? Because what your instinct is to cover yourself up when you're naked and somebody walks in that you don't know, or that you're surprised by. Why? Because they're going to look at you as something to consume. And love, godly agape love, is not consuming. It's laying your life down for the other person. And so sex in marriage for kids and for teenagers and for all of us, we need to learn to look at sexuality as something that is an act of worship, that is an act of laying our life down for our spouse. And as we do that, because sex is the most vulnerable thing you can do. Terry Hargrave talks about the idea that when you're having an orgasm, your brain literally shuts off for the time that it's happening, and you're out of control completely. With all the research that we have from a secular worldview, why would we put ourselves in positions with people we don't know and we don't trust to be the most helpless that we can ever be? And so it's just counterintuitive to think that we can have sex with strangers and random people and yet want to protect ourselves from safety in all other areas. But this one, the most compromising, the most vulnerable, we're gonna do this thing. And so we've got to teach ourselves that sex is so much more than chasing an orgasm or chasing physical pleasure, although those things are amazing and God wired us to get those, we've got to teach our kids that this is more about representing Christ in the church and coming together and being a husband and a wife and doing this in a way that's glorifying to God, because as we follow the way of Jesus, right, he is the way and the truth and the life. And so when we follow him and do these things his way, our body's reaction to it is beneficial, as you're proving. Our spiritual life is more, full. We're full of the Spirit. We're able to walk in the Spirit, and then mentally and emotionally, we see that the statistics play out that following Jesus, and not just like following rules, but having the ethics and living out Christ in our life is nothing but beneficial. And when we do the opposite, we've got early death, we've got cancer, we've got, miscarriages, we've got all a porn addiction, we've got erectile dysfunction, we've got all the things that we're seeing that have increased, like you've said beautifully, 200 and 400 and 1,000% in just 30 or 40 years. And so it breaks my heart, but I also get super passionate about it, as you see, that we as the church and us as Christian therapists and Christian scientists and Christian researchers and pastors, we've got to continue to fight to integrate this to the conversation with our smallest kids all the way through teenagers to what you're doing beautifully with young women and young adults. And the goal is not to hypersexualize them or put a chastity belt on them and lock them down and oppress or disempower their sexuality, but it's to allow them to do that in a way that will give them a thriving life.
Yeah, I can't add anything to that. That's you're describing human flourishing, and the
Right.
the pathways to human flourishing. So it's all positive, the things that we've talked about today. And that last summary and description you just made, I can't add anything to that. I think it's perfect.
Well, man, I appreciate your work so much. Like every time I talk to you, I'm like, man, I could keep talking to you for like 5 hours. I know you got stuff to do, and I do too. Man, I can't wait for your book to come out. I'm going to read it, and as I've done your other one, and yeah, I'd love to, like as I always say, keep chatting with you, keep supporting one another, and doing this work together.
It's an honor and a privilege. I thank you, Clint, for having me, and again, hopefully some nuggets of knowledge has helped your audience that we've discussed today.
Oh, it always does, man. They always get good feedback from all my people that listen to it. Thank you for coming on, and guys, thank you for listening. If you have any questions or, if anything that we said, it's very confusing in the world out there with all the information we have about sex and sexuality and, masculinity and feminist, movements and all the things that are going on. We don't know everything. We're trying to figure it out. We're trying to look at the facts and look at theology. We're two men who love women and love men and want us to have healthy sexuality. So if you have a question or an email, please shoot me an email or shoot Dr. Malone an email. We'd love to support you or help you, clarify any points or add to it. If you have stuff that you see, if you're out there and you're a therapist or a doctor and you're a Christian and you can help us and you can clarify some things, or, we're open to discussing these things and adding to our research and the work we're doing, because it takes the body of Christ, and we're not in this alone. So God bless you guys and have a good week.